Let's start.
I think now.
I will share something on screen. We have 3 minutes extra, which Sudhendraji has given from his time. So I'm going to share something.
मैम शुरुआत करने से पहले अगर आप ही के अंदाज में अगर कुछ 2 लाइनें हो जाएं तो।
This is a very interesting combination of dua and a shloka with some ashar that is shared from Sahil Ludhianvi sahab. खून अपना हो या पराया हो, नस्ल आदम का खून है आखिर। जंग मशरिक में हो कि मगरिब में, अमने आलम का खून है आखिर। खेत अपने जले की औरों के, ज़ीस्तफाकों से तिल मिलाती है। फतेह का जश्न हो कि हार का सोग, जिंदगी मैयतों पे रोती है। जंग तो खुद एक मसला है, जंग क्या मसलों का हल देगी। आग और खून आज बख्शेगी, भूख और एहतियाज कर देगी। इसलिए ऐ शरीफ इंसानों, जंग टलती रहे तो बेहतर है। आप और हम सभी के आंगन में शम्मा जलती रहे तो बेहतर है। मैत्रीं भजत अखिलः चेत्री, मैत्रीं भजत अखिलः चेत्री। आत्मवदेव परान्नपि पश्यत, युद्धं त्यजत स्पर्धां त्यजत, त्यजत परेषु अक्रममम् आक्रमणम्। मैत्रीं भजत अखिलः चेत्रीं। जननी पृथ्वी कामधुगास्ते, जननी पृथ्वी कामधुगास्ते। जनको देवः सकल दयालु, जनको देवा सकल दयालु। दाम्यत ददता दयध्वं जनता, श्रेयो भूयात् सकल जनानां, श्रेयो भूयात् सकल जनानां, श्रेयो भूयात् सकल जनानां, श्रेयो भूयात् सकल जनानां, सकल जनानां। आइए हाथ उठाएं हम जिन्हें रस में दुआ याद नहीं, हम जिन्हें सोज़े मुहब्बत के सिवा कोई बुत कोई खुदा याद नहीं, कोई बुत कोई खुदा याद नहीं।
So basically, uh, Smita Belu, she is a Sufi singer and she was to join, but she is traveling. She is traveling and she don't have access to the internet. So that's how we are able to play this link. But it would have been a great pleasure if she would have personally attended and sung this thing. So this is called as Dua and Shloka and share of the Sahit Ludhiana. So friends, welcome. Today, Vivekananda Connect Foundation takes an opportunity to organize panel discussion with most eminent personalities of our nation. We have Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, we have Surendra Kulkarni ji, we are going to joined by Major General G.D. Bakshi ji, then Dr. Manish Tabade from Jawaharlal Nehru University. We have Amir Khate from SarkariTel.com. And we have Tanmay Chakravarti, who is a principal advisor for the foundation. So today we are discussing one of the most important events of the last week, which has settled the whole world. And I will tell you the most interesting thing about this event is you go to the fruit vendor, you go to the vegetable vendor, you go to the tea vendor. They are discussing this event, international event. So this is all about the America, this is all about the Afghanistan, this is all about the Taliban, and this is all about the pro-America government, which was there in the Kabul, and now we have a Taliban, which is going to form the new government. So all these sabji walas, fruit walas, chai walas, they are discussing this international event, and even they are advising the President Biden that he should have done this, he should have done that. That kind of thing is happening in India and globally, because we have around 80 crore smartphones in our hand of Indians. Whether it is the commonest common man, they have a smartphone, they have access to the internet, they have access to the social media, WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and they can watch and comment. So this is a kind of very big revolution, information revolution, access, internet access. So this is there. Second thing, which are very interesting, is that we know America is a superpower, military superpower, economic superpower, and now we Indians, most of the Indians, they love America. They love the way of American life, and everybody's dream is to go in America and settle down there. So of course, America is a free land, it's a democratic land, it's land of opportunities. It's also a military superpower, and they are seen as the Dada of the world. And they have a list called terrorist lists. Conveniently, Americans put organization in and out of terrorist lists conveniently. And now same thing is happening with the Taliban. For Taliban, Russia was a Kafir country, Russians were the Kafirs, and Americans were their friends. Now we see Taliban, Americans are the Kafirs, and now the Kafir Russians, they are no more Kafirs for the Taliban. And even we may see China investing heavily in Afghanistan and jointly maybe working on infrastructure in Afghanistan with the Taliban. So the Kafir list for Taliban also conveniently changes with the time. And as Indians, we don't have much to do it as per the military solution is concerned. What we do is, Afghanistan was a part of India. It was separated from British India in 1919. And then we can see that in spite of that, Afghans, they are seen as the friends of India. All the ethnic groups of Afghan, they have a goodwill and friendship for India. They don't hate India the way some elements in Pakistan may hate, they may not hate, I don't know. But Afghanistan, they don't hate Indians. And even the Taliban, which is a Pashtun-dominated ethnic group, they are also saying that they won't be doing anti-India activities. So time will say what they do on actual ground. And India, as a friendship gesture, our Prime Minister's previous Prime Minister and current Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji, we have built a dam there, we have a dam and power project, Salma Dam. It's a friendship project. We are building 218 kilometers of highway. We are building educational institutes, skill capacity building, skill building, hospitals, and also we are building their parliament. So India has a very big role to play in Afghanistan, positive role to play. Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji is to contribute in nation building, not through military solutions, but through nation building solutions. So this is India's positive approach. And as Swami Vivekananda said, every nation has a message to deliver, mission to fulfill, destiny to reach. The mission of India has been to guide humanity. So our goal is to guide humanity, not to disturb humanity, not to attack humanity. And military solution has never been India's solution. Our solution has been a friendship and love and compassion. So that's what Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji is following, and we are all proud of it. So I will request my friend Ameya Sathe to introduce the panel. Ameya, you are unmuted.
Yes, Rajesh.
Okay, you can continue.
Thank you, Rajesh. This is almost 3 days in a row that I've got one more opportunity to talk on Afghanistan. Today, we have a very distinguished panel of experts from diverse spheres and disciplines. The global hotspot these days is Afghanistan, on which today's panel discussion is focused on. I'll introduce my first panelist, Sudhendra Kulkarni ji, who served as an AD of former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and is a founder of the Forum for a New South Asia powered by India, Pakistan, China cooperation. Welcome, Mr. Kulkarni.
Dhanyawad.
The second distinguished guest on this panel today is Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, who is a former diplomat and has been Ambassador of India to Syria, Afghanistan, Myanmar. He has also worked in the United Nations headquarters in New York as a consultant on social development and has been a visiting scholar at the Kemi Endowment for International Peace. Welcome, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay ji.
Namaskar. Namaste.
Our third distinguished guest is Professor Manish Dabade, who is an Assistant Professor of Diplomacy and Disarmament in the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and convener of the Indian Diplomacy Research Group. His teaching and research interest includes diplomacy, history, theory, and practices, with a special reference to India. So I welcome Professor Manish Dabade to this very special program. My third guest, I think who is going to join very soon, is Major General G.D. Bakshi, who is a combat veteran, PhD in strategic studies, and author of many books. He is also the editor of Indian Military Review. G.D. Bakshi has been known for being a very passionate speaker and is an inspiration for the youth. And we have the fifth distinguished guest who is joining us today is Mr. Tanmay Chakravarti, who is a Group Government Affairs Officer at the Tata Sons based in Delhi. He has handled coordination of Tata Group with the government. So I welcome Tanmay ji on this very special program.
Thank you.
I now hand it over to Rajesh to continue the panel discussion.
So we have our first panelist, Sudhendra Kulkarni ji. Everybody would like to understand his views.
Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay ji, Tanmay ji, my old friend, Dr. Manish Dabade, another old friend, Ameya Sathe, another old friend, and of course, my friend from Mumbai, Dr. Rajesh Sarvajna, the organizer of this program. My sincere thanks to all of you. The attention of the entire world is today focused on the developments in Afghanistan. And I'm going to share my views on this. And some of these views I know are unpopular, yet truth as I see it must be told. It is my truth. Someone may have their own truth and I respect them. In Sanskrit, we have a wise saying, Vade Vade Jayate Tattva Bodhaha, which means that true understanding of any issue emerges only through honest, candid, and free dialogue among differing perspectives. Friends, to understand the developments in Afghanistan in a true perspective, we need to look at them both comprehensively and against their historical background. Afghanistan has witnessed four major developments. First, the original sinners, I'll call them Mool Papis, for most of the deaths, destruction, and sufferings that Afghanistan has gone through in the last 4 decades are the two superpowers. First, the invasion of the Soviet Union, 1979 to 1989, and then invasion, occupation by America from 2001 to 2021. I witnessed the departure of the last contingent of Soviet troops from Kabul on February 15, 1989, when I covered the event as a correspondent of the now extinct Sunday Observer newspaper. Now our civilizational neighbor, Afghanistan, has become free from foreign invasions and occupation and wars waged by these two superpowers. If there is any anti-colonial, anti-imperialist bone in our bodies, then we must celebrate Afghanistan's freedom from foreign invasion and occupation, and not say that Americans should have stayed back for a longer period and defeated Taliban. Of course, during this entire period, Afghanistan has also suffered from external interference, violent interference from Pakistan, which has misused Afghanistan for its own nefarious ends. The Soviet-American invasions are over, but the interference from Pakistan is not yet over. One thing is certain, Afghans are proud people. If they could defeat the Soviets and Americans, they certainly will defeat any attempt by Pakistan to dominate Afghanistan and use it for its own purposes. The second most important development is that Ashraf Ghani's puppet government has collapsed like a pack of cards, and the president himself has fled the country. This raises an important question. Americans are reported to have spent over $1 trillion. That is 70 lakh crore rupees. 70 lakh crore rupees. Can we even imagine the magnitude of this amount? But what did it gain for Americans themselves? Just a few days ago, friends, the American Secretary of State, Blinken, claimed that Americans' mission in Afghanistan is successful. He said, we went to Afghanistan 20 years ago with one mission in mind, that was to deal with the people that attacked us on 9/11. That mission has been successful. This is a bizarre, self-congratulatory claim. Let's look at some facts and figures. The deaths of Americans in the 9/11, most condemnable 9/11 terrorist attacks, 2001, the number is 2,996. But in these 20 years, the number of American soldiers killed in Afghanistan is 2,500. US contractors killed is nearly 4,000. Afghan National Army soldiers and police personnel killed is 66,000. NATO soldiers killed is 1,200. Afghan civilians killed nearly 50,000. You know, which humane person, rational person can condone this kind of killing and in fact self-destruction in the name of war on terror? And we all know that Osama bin Laden was killed 10 years ago in 2011. By that time, the war on terror, in their own definition, ended. why did America stay back in Afghanistan for 10 more years? So looking at the abrupt and almost irresponsible withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan, which has caused the current chaos, largely, of course, there are other reasons too. Can we say that Americans are trustworthy? If Americans could not counter, contain, and defeat Taliban, can we trust them to counter, contain, and defeat China in a crisis in future? Therefore, all of us Indians must ask ourselves, why are we putting so much trust in Americans in the so-called Quad or quadrilateral plan to contain China? The third most important development in Afghanistan is that neither the Soviets nor Americans left Afghanistan on their own. They were driven out by the people of Afghanistan. Taliban, of course, was not the only organizations that struggled against foreign invasion. There were other organizations also, such as the Northern Alliance and others. Nevertheless, Taliban is one of the prominent amongst them. I call all of them, both Talibanis and non-Talibanis who fought and defeated foreign invasion, as Afghan patriots. Now, this is an unpopular view. Let me explain. If India is attacked and colonized by a foreign country, my first duty as a patriot, as an Indian patriot, is to work with a single-minded determination to drive out the foreigners out of my country and free my sacred soil. This is a test of patriotism. It applies to India, Vietnam, Algeria, or even America itself, which was once a colony of Britain. Therefore, I call the Taliban Afghan patriots. Of course, they are flawed Afghan patriots because they also committed heinous crimes and atrocities under the influence of a fanatical interpretation of Islam. They robbed the freedom and rights of women. They robbed the freedom and rights of minorities like Hindus and Sikhs. They destroyed Bamiyan Buddha. They colluded with ISI of Pakistan in the hijack of Indian Airlines plane. All these are crimes that cannot be condoned at all. Now, fourth important development. Whether anyone likes it or not, a Taliban-led government in Kabul is going to be a reality. So what should India do? New Delhi will have no option but to recognize it in due course, because most capitals around the world are going to do so. Neither India nor any other country can now go to Afghanistan and defeat Taliban. Simply impossible. If Taliban has to be defeated, it is the Afghan people themselves have to do it. And they will do it if Taliban continues to indulge in the same kind of crimes that they did before. Now, just because Taliban have gained power does not mean they have gained legitimacy. Certainly not the legitimacy in the eyes of the international community. The Taliban, therefore, must address three important concerns, legitimate concerns of India as well as the rest of the international community. The first concern is that Taliban must not allow the territory of Afghanistan to be used for any terrorist activity against any country. The second genuine concern that all of us have is that they must ensure the safety, equality, and dignity of all non-Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Hazaras, and of course, they must ensure the rights of women. Third, having seized power, the Taliban must move in the direction of inclusive government, national reconciliation, and national reconstruction. My own assessment, friends, is that the international community will force Taliban to change its old ways if they want to remain in power. For example, Russia and China, the two principal backers of Taliban today, will surely not like Taliban to export terrorism and Islamist extremism. Even Pakistan, which tried to coerce, manipulate, and misuse Taliban for its own ends, is now wary. After all, Pakistan itself has become a huge victim of terrorism in the last 20, 30 years. Just day before yesterday, General Bajwa, the chief of Pakistan Army, made a very important statement, and I quote, Pakistan expects Taliban will fulfill the promises made to the international community regarding women, regarding human rights, and also not allowing Afghan land to be used against any other country. Unquote. On its part, even Iran will not want a fanatic Muslim government in Kabul. Friends, Afghanistan developments, I conclude now, Afghan developments have taught some important lessons to all the internal and external stakeholders. The first lesson, no more invasion of one country by another. The sovereignty of every nation, big or small, rich or poor, must be respected. No more wars. And this is where I really want to congratulate Rajesh ji for beginning this program with that soulful song by Smita Bellur, who said, खून अपना हो या पराया, ये आदमी का खून है, इंसान का खून है. और जंग अपने आप में एक मसला है, ये दूसरे मसलों को क्या हल कर सकता है? I think Smita Bellur's song by Sahir Ludhiani has set the tone for today's discussion. The second important lesson, terrorism and religious extremism are enemies of humanity. They must be fought within the framework of international law and not by any country working as the policeman of the world. The third important lesson, prescriptive approach to impose Western democratic values and Western modernity is irresponsible and counterproductive, as has actually happened in Afghanistan. Fourth important lesson, it is a responsibility of the entire international community, including India, to collectively help Afghanistan, because Afghanistan today is in need of help, especially economic reconstruction. Last, India and Pakistan should work together and not work at cross purposes in Afghanistan, because it is our civilizational duty. Afghanistan is a civilizational neighbor of both India and Pakistan. Lastly, friends, if there is no external interference, I believe, I've been to Afghanistan twice, I believe that Afghanistan will become a miracle nation in the decades ahead, just as Vietnam did after it regained its sovereignty and unity. Afghanistan is blessed with enormous, fabulous natural resources. India and Pakistan, in the spirit of South Asian solidarity, have a moral responsibility to collaboratively assist our great civilizational neighbor, Afghanistan, in achieving this transition. And therefore, SAARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, which is in coma today, when our neighbor is in such crisis and suffering so much, SAARC is in crisis, SAARC is in coma, it must be revived. And all of us in South Asia must come together to help Afghanistan. Thank you. Jai Hind, Jai Jagat.
Thank you very much, Subhadra ji. It's been a long time to hear you. I remember I have attended at least 200 events in Cultural Research Foundation under your leadership in Mumbai. And that's how we inspired me. Whatever we are doing today, it has a lot of inspiration from this Cultural Research Foundation's activities in Mumbai, which we attended, but from so many other organizations. So your views are extraordinary, and definitely people of India, they will rethink the way they think after listening to you. Thank you very much. So now we go to Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay. He has been three conflict areas. One is Syria. He was ambassador to Syria. Second is Afghanistan. He was ambassador to Afghanistan. And third is Burma, which has just received last year the democracy is ended and the army has taken over Burma. And also he has worked in United Nations. So, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, you are the right person to speak on this subject, what is happening now since last week in Afghanistan. Please.
Thank you. I hope the internet is stable and I can be heard
Yeah,
properly.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, let me thank you, Dr. Rajesh, Mr. Ameya Sathe, especially Sudhindra ji. When I think he was working in the PMO, I was across the South Block in the Ministry of Defense. And of course, all the other colleagues who are present here, Dr. Manish, General Bakshi when he comes, and all of everyone present here. Let me also sort of make my a little kind of acknowledgement that it's a great pleasure to be part of a platform that is in the name of Vivekananda ji, and also a platform that is actually Mumbai based, because this is something that we don't often get the opportunity to see. And like Sudhindra ji, I also want to pay my respect to Smita Bellur for beginning, and to the Vivekananda Youth Connect for beginning this event with that snatch of music. Very meaningful and very touching point of music. And I think in many ways, perhaps this is what sets Mumbai apart from Delhi, that in Mumbai you actually begin with some really beautiful interfaith music. So I will, I also really greatly appreciate the spirit in which Sudhindra ji spoke, a spirit of peace, a spirit of amity, a spirit of cooperation, a spirit of anti-colonialism, a spirit of anti-imperialism. I share, needless to say, and the spirit of friendship with Afghanistan, needless to share, I share all these sentiments. And also his sentiment that, in a debate there are diverse points of view and we reach the truth through a kind of discussion between different points of view. If everyone thinks alike, there's no beauty in all that. But of course, my position is quite different, so I will try and pose this in a very different way, in full respect for Sudhindra ji's point of view as well. So one problem that I had with Sudhindra ji's presentation was that he posed it in terms of Afghans versus foreign occupation. I agree to a great extent. The original sin in this whole enterprise has been the US-Soviet rivalry, which brought in the Soviets into the country and which led to Pakistani interference and then 40 years of war. We should not forget that. For people who try to make this an India-Pakistan thing, we should remind them that you are behind it. And superpower rivalry continues to be behind it. Now it is perhaps China, Russia, and Iran on the other side. This is one part of the story. But I think since the withdrawal of the Soviet Union, the protagonists in the war have completely changed. Since the withdrawal of the Soviet Union, it is the Pakistani war against Afghans. And the Taliban is the principal vehicle of that war. It's not an India-Pakistan war, it is a Pakistan-Afghan war. It's not an Afghan-Pak war, it's not the Afghans who started it. It's a Pakistani-Afghan war. And today, if we are seeing scenes of desperation, of women throwing their babies to US so-called occupation forces, if we are seeing football players, national football players and doctors clutching onto the wheels of aeroplanes to flee Afghanistan, there is a reason for it. In 1995-96, when the Taliban came, they were religious students who came out of the madrasas, refugee camp madrasas in Pakistan, and they were led by a respected preacher, Mullah Omar, in the context of the intra-Mujahideen fighting in Afghanistan. And they were received with some relief. I would not say anything more than that, because they ended the conflict and they brought some kind of peace. But it was a very repressive, imposed peace. And the Afghan people, not Americans, Afghan people led the resistance and the fight eventually against. And of course, that fight was led by Ahmad Shah Massoud and many other leaders of Afghanistan, but Massoud became the symbolic head of that fight. So I want to, say that let's actually, are the Taliban patriots, as Sudhindra ji calls them? Are they Afghan patriots? So I will give a slightly alternative view on this. The Taliban are a Pakistani project. They are a Pakistani project that came out of madrasas, refugee madrasas in Pakistan, starting in 1994. They were supported by the Pakistani state. At that stage, it was not even the ISI, it was the Home Minister, Nasrullah Babar, under Benazir's government, who started this project. So they have, and these children, they have been brainwashed, and select students amongst them have been brainwashed into suicide terrorism. I've been to Afghanistan at various stages. Actually, the first time I've been to Afghanistan was in 1977, before the Soviet intervention. Afghanistan was a normal country. People talk about Afghanistan being a crossroads, about a roundabout. This was the period hundreds and hundreds of buses from Europe used to traverse the entire region through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, come to India, and the same people would be going back. I next came there in 2001 after the Taliban were ousted, actually within 1 week of that, and then of course third time as ambassador, and since then I've been going back. So they are a Pakistani project from 1994, which is a 27-year-old project. The core of that project has been to erase Afghan and Pashtun identity and submerge it into a larger pan-Islamic identity. In fact, they are trying to end the idea of, the Pashtun tribes and so on. I mean, that's the basic goal on that. And the idea behind that is so that Afghanistan does not become a problem to Pakistan. In the context of the Durand Line, Afghanistan becomes literally a Suba, a fifth province of Pakistan. That Afghanistan ends its historic 2,500-year-old, even more perhaps, relationship with India, severs that entirely, particularly severs the Pashtun relationship, which was a very strong part of it, but also the Tajik, Uzbek, and Hazara, and many other sort of ethnicities of that, and in a way disconnect it and link it with Central Asia, and now bring China on board into that project. Part of this whole effort has been to destroy the spirit of Afghanistan. Today you see that, by and large, this collapse that we talk about of the Afghan army and the Afghan government, why has it taken place? Many reasons. One is psychological dependence on the Americans. One is psychological denial that the Americans are leaving. But at the heart of it, people have been fed up with 40 years of war. And they want peace at this point of time at any cost. They are not resisting because they said, look, enough. Bhai, ho gaya. Jo ho gaya, so ho gaya, maan liya. Aapko maan liya. And it's a tactical peace. I was at a media event with some people, and there was an Afghan lady there, and she described it in Hindi very beautifully, but she used words in English. She said, she was asked, what do you want? And she said, we want freedom. Those women who are sending their children out through American soldiers to the rest of the world, they are seeking freedom for their children. And the second thing she said was peace. Freedom and peace. You can add a third element, prosperity, but freedom and peace was what they wanted. Right now, the peace that we are seeing is it's also part of the Pakistani project, is to wear them out by attrition, by terrorism, by fear, by intimidation, and lay Afghanistan before their feet. What we are seeing right now is exactly that. So, who are the patriots? To me, the patriots are those people who want freedom. Whether it was against the Soviets, whether it was against the British, whether it was against the Americans. But those patriots are the people who are now going to be subject to Pakistan's project of domination, of tutelage, and of severance of its relationship with India. Now they use the term geoeconomics. You see, they've stopped using the word strategic depth. Geoeconomics is their instrument of trying to sever this relationship and connect it to Central Asia with the help of China. right? The United States has played a very dirty game in this. It came in there as a counter-terrorism mission, selfish reason, just because Bin Laden was given hospitality by the Taliban. They removed it. Then it expanded into a counter-insurgency mission, uh, partly learning lessons from Iraq. Then it turned into a training and equipping mission. By 2014, after Obama declared his surge and withdrawal, the mission changed. Now, unfortunately, I think the Americans are moving towards an intelligence campaign, an intelligence war. And they have, since 2018, since the time they reached out to the Taliban and to Pakistan, they have effectively dumped, they have enabled, they have facilitated the Pakistani project of the Taliban in order to destabilize the region a little more so that their strategic rivals, China, Russia, and Iran, are kept off balance. And they have helped this. The US Taliban deal of February 29 to 2020, the whole design behind that was to pull the rug off the Afghan government and facilitate takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban through the negotiating table, if possible. But if the negotiating table didn't work, they knew the troops that they had there. The US did not allow the development of the Afghan National Army. Afghan National Army was not developed. All that they did was they developed counter-terrorism capacities. They did not create an army. They did not create an army with artillery, with mobility, with armor, with the infantry battalions that would support a national army that was capable of resisting an enemy, of holding on to territory and defending their country. They did this out of their dependence, but also out of their sensitivity for Pakistan. And in this, the British also helped a lot. So they left Afghanistan weak, vulnerable to this, I would call it an invasion. An invasion, and that too an occupation and invasion in which the primary tactic that they have used is terrorism, fear, intimidation, tiring people out. Now, we have a reality. Taliban are there. What do we do? They are saying some good things. I think we have to give them a chance to see whether they are serious about that. They are working on an inclusive government. I think we have to wait to see if it is really going to be inclusive or just a few names who are there for show business, for show to other people. Whereas in fact, real power 100% will lie with the Taliban. And even to the extent that they will get other ethnics, they will first whitewash their ethnicity. They will try to immerse this, just as they did with the Pashtuns, into a larger Islamic identity. And that Islamic identity they will try and export, because it's in the nature of that beast that you will be exported. And in this war, the Taliban, you call them patriots, Sudhindraji. I will say that they have done deals with the Americans, they have done deals with the Iranians, they have done deals with the Russians behind the back of the Afghan people, and they have collaborated and used Pakistani territory to attack the Afghan people. It is a Pakistani war against the Afghan people. They are not patriots. They are traitors. Now, reality is that they are there. We have to see if they reform, if they change. But we should understand what their grand design is and what the Pakistani mastermind's grand design is. 60,000 Taliban did not take over and control 34 million Afghans just by light infantry weapons. There is strategic thinking behind this. There is tactical thinking behind this. There's information operations. There's psychological war. Everything has been used. This victory of Pakistan will be a case study in unconventional warfare, in the use of very different instruments to wage war against a people, and a proud, as Sudhindraji said, a proud people who have never accepted foreign occupation. In this case, the occupiers have an Afghan face, but a Pakistani mind and a Pakistani hand. And we should understand this. I'll end at that.
Thank you, Ambassador Gautam Upadhyay ji. In fact, you are the most...
One last line. through all this, the West has known that Pakistan is the root cause of the problem. Bush knew it, Obama knew it, he said so. South Asia strategy of Trump knew it. But Pakistan has been given a pass by the whole world. And it is still going to get a pass. The root cause of this problem is Pakistan. The international community has not used coercive diplomacy against Pakistan or Afghanistan. That is the only instrument that they have not used. They've bombed their people, but they have not used this instrument.
Thank you, Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay. In fact, you are the person who has been to Afghanistan, Syria, and Burma, all conflict lands, and you have first-hand experience of dealing and.
I hope you are not holding me responsible for the mess in these three countries.
No. In fact, it may be the reason that you have been moved out of that area and that this area landed into the conflict.
Thank you.
That may be the reason. So we will have a question and answer session after Dr. Manish Dabhade's views on this. So I will request Dr. Manish Dabhade. He is from Center of International Studies from one of the premier university, Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU. And recently, the Swami Vivekananda statue is installed in the premises of Jawaharlal Nehru University by the Vice Chancellor and our National Security Advisor, Ajit Dovalji. So, Dr. Manish ji, please take over the mic.
I hope I'm audible.
Yeah.
Thank you first, Dr. Rajesh and my friend Ameya for organizing this obviously very timely session. And I'm equally, I heard Surendraji, again a very passionate point of view, which I immensely respect. But also Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, who also made a very passionate plea to understand what the realities are on the ground and how Taliban is the Pakistan project. No doubts about it, and I'm firmly in that sense. While I agree with the larger, maybe a very humanist perspective on what is happening around us, or especially in Afghanistan, but I'm firmly in Ambassador Mukhopadhyay's camp, so to speak. What I'm going to do is, we had a very brilliant exposition by both on what exactly is happening on the ground in Afghanistan. So I'll just stick to being a diplomacy person. Let me stick to what is India's diplomatic roadmap now in Afghanistan. So where is India now expending its diplomatic energies? What sort of investments it is doing now, diplomatic investments, and what is the large objective? Let me get two very important things out of the way. The MA approach now is strategic patience. That is the mantra, I think, which is being adopted by the MEA under Prime Minister Modi. And this is, in fact, unlike President Joe Biden, who really left in huff and puff. And in fact, that was, if you read today's New York Times, Ambassador Ryan Crocker, who was American ambassador in Pakistan and earlier Afghanistan, exactly says that it is because the president gave up the logic of strategic patience in Afghanistan. Number two, talking to Taliban, I think Ambassador Mukhopadhyay has already pointed out that it is not a question of if, but I think at some point India will need to engage. And in fact, it's not that India has not talked to the Taliban earlier. In fact, there have been many instances where, the secret channel is obviously on, back channel is obviously on with so-called nationalist factions, nationalist elements in the Taliban. In fact, you have 2011, then you have also, for example, in the Moscow peace talks where you had the Indian representatives in a non-official capacity, top diplomats, former diplomats attending those peace talks. So these are two main things I think we really need to understand first as larger, the big picture in that sense on Indian diplomacy in Afghanistan. So coming to the main substantive points, so where exactly are India's diplomatic energies focused now? First, obviously, and that has been repeatedly pointed out by Dr. S. Jaishankar, that the safety of Indian nationals in Afghanistan and their safe evacuation back to India are a priority, and in fact, that's exactly why we have a special Afghanistan cell in the MEA. And again, he rightly pointed out that it is a difficult and a complicated exercise. We have, in fact, India and the US, especially because US controls the Kabul airport still. There is a active collaboration, cooperation, and also obviously this is a US-centered diplomacy in that sense on the evacuation of internationals. But we are also talking to France, Qatar, and also some elements of Taliban. I mean, there are obviously media reports. If I mean, you can dismiss them, you can believe them, but I think on the ground, an ambassador Mukhopadhyay would vouch for this, that you just cannot reach the Kabul airport without some sort of negotiations, because the Taliban is actually manning many entrances outside the airport, many entry-exit points. The number two, for which diplomatic sort of energy, what India is doing now is public diplomacy. So what they are doing is India is on a diplomatic offensive. And again, there are multiple avenues which India is exploiting brilliantly. That India is now the chair of the UN Security Council this month. So you had the UN Security Council press statement, a press briefing, where you talked about 8-point action plan to combat terrorism. The main important point was zero tolerance of terrorism. India is also part of the Taliban sanctions committee. So India really, in that sense, can or is putting out that how it is looking at the question of Afghanistan, maybe not directly but indirectly, relating it to the terrorism. Also, as Ambassador pointed out, was who were Taliban. So again, it is really the Pakistan-sponsored project. On Afghanistan per se, I think India has espoused first principles, what I call them first principles, now and even earlier. That most famously, obviously, that Afghanistan's past cannot be its future. The question of national sovereignty of Afghanistan, and how this whole process, the peace process, it has to be Afghanistan-led, Afghanistan-owned, and Afghanistan-controlled. So in some ways, India is trying to put a moral pressure of sorts, that this is purely the democratic way out. And you also see maybe Taliban is responding, and I'm not saying that to Indian pressure or Indian statements, but that there is some sense of negotiations happening with, you can see Hamid Karzai, with Abdullah. So I think that is one channel, that is one focus India is constantly having since last couple of days, especially since August 15th. Again, the idea is that you have an inclusive peace process, so that Taliban is not the only player in Afghanistan's governance landscape, but also a very important point about the counter-terrorism, that at some level that needs to be central, and in fact that is where India and US and some other partners also share that objective, including Afghanistan's neighbors and possibly China too. That counter-terrorism has to be in some ways a focus of diplomatic energies now. The third part of India's diplomatic energy is obviously building or talking to different partners. And here, as I said, this is really, in some ways, India is really pinning its hope on the US despite its withdrawal, because even now the US shares, or India shares, the strategic objectives of the war of terror, and that Afghanistan's soil should not be used for anti-terror operations against US, but also against India. But again, there is a divergence here between India and the US, which Jaishankar himself pointed out. Also, in terms of Iran, I think Iran is a very important player here. And you see back-to-back visits by, again, Foreign Minister Jaishankar was also at the swearing ceremony of the new Iranian president. And there is a history of conversations and cooperation in some ways, especially in the intelligence arena between India and Iran. Russia, obviously, India was part of the peace talks 2018 onwards. India has participated. And again, as I said earlier, that India has been talking to some nationalist elements of Taliban in Afghanistan, and most importantly, for example, 2011. I'm going back to 2011 in London. India is also, in terms of international conversations, is also part of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Contact Group. In fact, India has participated since 2018 there. So it's not that. So In that sense, India did realize that the ground was shifting in Afghanistan, and at some level, India has to engage with a broad spectrum, including the Taliban in Afghanistan. The next major part was which I'm going to talk about is what sort of diplomatic investments India seems to be looking at. And here I think India in Afghanistan wants to continue its so-called soft power presence. So it really includes capacity building, economic development cooperation projects, but also maintaining people to people historic linkages which were being referred to by both esteemed speakers. In terms of diplomatic objectives, I think, and that's my last substantive point, is that India, I think, at this stage, obviously, other than the strategic patience, which seems to be the larger mantra, the buzzword of the Indian government, is looking at building a national sense, the Afghan and with the Afghan, and also an international coalition with very brief, with a very limited mandate or very limited objectives. Is that first is that you really prevent the Afghan soil being used again for the anti-India terror operations. So I think that remains a very important focal point for Indian diplomacy. And again, as I said, that India will look at continuing the engagement with Afghan people. In fact, in one of the recent interviews in New York, when Ajay Shankar was asked that by a journalist that how is India looking at the Afghanistan investments in Afghanistan, and he made a very cryptic but a very important valid point that the relationship, we don't look at it as an investment. It is really about historic civilizational linkages between the Indian and the Afghan people, and that's exactly why India is also opening its arms to especially people, to Afghans who have been partners for India since 2001. So at some stage, I think this whole narrative which is there in India that all is lost, we have completely been defeated. I still think that we do still have some sort of leverages, some sort of alliance partners, some sort of partners, international partners, I think, which we should use them strategically to really continue our very valued and very important engagement in our extended neighborhood, which is Afghanistan also. So I think I'll stop here. That's it. Yeah. Thank you.
So we will have a free discussion where Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, Sudhindra Kulkarni, and Manish Dabhade, and in fact, Amey can also join. So, Sudhindra ji, you have heard Ambassador Mukhopadhyay also, you have this Dr. Manish also. So, what do you have to say?
Let me begin by making a point. Dr. Manish Dabhade said that India has been in talks with the nationalist part of the Taliban, which means that there is a nationalist part of Taliban that India knows and wants to talk to and has indeed been talking to. Now this, most respectfully, because Gautam Mukhopadhyay ji has been the ambassador, he knows a lot more than all of us put together. Nevertheless, it contradicts with his claim that Taliban is a Pakistan project and a Pakistan creation. Perhaps this is an exaggeration. It does not tell the whole truth. The Taliban, there is a nationalist element, and this nationalist element is going to defeat even Pakistan. If Pakistan continues its project, and I agree with Gautam Mukhopadhyay ji that it indeed is a creation, but it is a Taliban is not entirely under the domination of Pakistan. Secondly, Manish ji said that India shares a strategic objective with USA on war on terror. I think that the time has come to really review this whole concept of war on terror the manner in which America conducted this war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq has taught some very stark lessons to us. In the name of war on terror, the United States attacked Iraq, and by telling a lie to the international community that there are weapons of mass destruction, and killed tens of thousands of innocent people in Iraq. The same thing that they did in Afghanistan. They dropped the so-called mother of all bombs on innocent people of Afghanistan, killed in that particular instance hundreds of them. Now, is this war on terror? Can we have any shared strategic objective on this concept of war on terror? This actually breeds more terrorists. Then, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, you said that if Pakistan is now using the term geoeconomics, and geoeconomics is actually a way to take Afghanistan towards Central Asia and all that. But frankly, geoeconomics and geoeconomics connectivity also means connecting Afghanistan to India through Pakistan. So connectivity goes both ways, both westwards and eastwards. So the connectivity that we are talking about, in which Afghanistan occupies a very important geoeconomic space, Pakistan occupies a geoeconomic space. It connects all of South Asia to West Asia, to Central Asia, to Eurasia. So it is therefore not very convincing to think that geoeconomics is a plot to take Afghanistan away from India. In fact, if it is intelligently used, India can gain direct access to Afghanistan through Pakistan, and thereby, have many ambitious projects like the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline or the TAPI project, Turkmenistan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, India. All these projects are going to be in India's long-term interest. Now, I am very heartened to learn from Ambassador Mukhopadhyay himself that we should give Taliban a chance. They are making some positive statements and we should give them a chance. Now, this is precisely what the international community is saying. What Chinese are saying, Russians are saying, even Americans are saying. So this is the time for all of us to work together. And in working together, we cannot bypass Pakistan, because Pakistan is the next door neighbor of Afghanistan. In its misadventure, it has tried to gain something, but in the process, there has been a Frankenstein created, which is hurting Pakistan itself, the so-called Pakistan Taliban, TTP. So looking at all these things, there is some congruence of interest between India and Pakistan, which we should not ignore. I have some other points which so therefore, Taliban is not entirely traitors.
Ambassador Mukhopadhyay.
Yeah. So thank you very much, and thank you, Manish, since you spoke after me, for actually covering the sort of diplomatic ground very competently. So 3-4 points. Of course, there is so much more that one could speak, but just addressing the debate. Firstly, I actually share Sulindarji's views on this whole business of the Indo-US cooperation on the war on terror. If you accept what I said, that actually the Americans have set the Taliban onto Afghanistan to create instability in the region, collateral damage of that is going to be faced by Afghans themselves, number one. You should always keep them on top, and countries like India and Central Asian republics who mean well for Afghanistan. So that collaboration, that cooperation is in fact we have been dumped. That's the long and short of it. Second, if you're talking about the international community, Sudhindarji, if we have to go by what the international community is doing, they have made their deals with the Taliban behind the backs of the Afghan people, behind the backs of the Afghan government for their own selfish interests. They are fed up with Afghanistan, they want to leave, they just want to hand over the Afghan file to Pakistan or anyone, the Taliban or anyone. we may as well not have a foreign policy if we just go by what others are doing, and others are doing in their own selfish interest. We have to analyze what is happening for ourselves, and we have to analyze what we should do for ourselves. When Pol Pot conducted the genocides in Cambodia, we had the courage to stand up and take a completely different stance from the rest of the world. And that time it was China who was behind Pol Pot. Third, your point about nationalist Taliban. Important. See, the project is not complete. At the end of it, there are Taliban leaders, there are Taliban factions. We know that they are chafing against Pakistani tutelage. They hate the Pakistanis. There are terminologies that I've heard Taliban leaders have supposed to have used about the Taliban. Mullah Zaif is in print to say that about the Pakistanis, that you can do that. But the problem is this, that they may feel like that, but they cannot wriggle out. They are completely in their clutches. So again, it's not what they feel, but it's what their actions are. And on this whole question, what is more important to them, the Emirate or Afghanistan? If Afghanistan was more important to them, we had peace talks for a year and a half. Why could not they put Afghanistan on top and make peace with the other Afghans? Are you saying that other Afghans' views don't matter? In that case, they should have compromised with other Afghans and formed done a power sharing deal, or formed a government, and also come and participate in politics. Islamist politics parties in Afghanistan are nothing new. You have the Jamiat-e-Islami, you have the Hizb-e-Islami, you have Sayyaf Saab, you have a dozen parties starting from about the 70s in the name of Islam. But does Taliban have any presence in Afghanistan? Is there any party that calls itself Taliban? Have you seen this so-called liberation army being welcomed all over Afghanistan? Nothing. There's just resignation. There is no welcome. There's no celebration. In fact, Afghans have had the courage, women have had the courage to defy the Taliban. Afghans have had the courage to defy the Taliban flag and insist on the Afghan flag. And these are the beginnings of the resistance. So the project is not complete. But the time to see those divisions to come is after they leave the clutches of the Pakistanis and come to Kabul. And then we shall see whether they are in fact chafing, whether what their design is. Pakistan will keep trying to control them. And if one faction wants to reach out to us, one faction wants to go against Pakistan, you can be sure that Pakistan has its own horses, paltu horses in the fray, like the Haqqani network. And if the Haqqani network becomes too independent tomorrow, they will find another network to do the job. Just as with the Mujahideen. All the Mujahideen parties were pro-Pakistani. Most of them became anti-Pakistani except for one or two. The Pakistanis fear the same thing will happen with the Taliban, right? They fear that once they get to Afghanistan, they will become independent and they will turn against them. So it's in their interest to keep Afghanistan unstable so that they never become united and never become a threat to them, so that they can use it for strategic depth. Take my word for this. Geoeconomics. So the whole geoeconomics game for Pakistan is that South Asia ends with Pakistan. You have the US now talking about a connectivity quad with Uzbekistan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the US. The Afghanistan-Pakistan transit trade agreement has been around for a long time. Pakistan does not allow two-way ground surface transport between India and Afghanistan. If you could not do it in the last 20 years, even with American backing, Holbrooke actually tried, but it was a half-hearted attempt. Now, the game in this is that, in fact, actually it will help the Chinese, because if you connect Central Asia with Pakistan, they're going to use the BRI route, the CPEC route of the Chinese to get out through Pakistan, whether it's Gwadar or it is Karachi. You see, Pakistan has the advantage of a hard frontier with India, and it is going to make it harder still, particularly for trade and commerce. And I think these are the 4 points that I think came out of the discussion that I wanted to place on the table.
Now we will move our question and answer session. First question.
Yep, Rajesh, can I respond?
I think Manish ji hasn't been given a chance yet.
Sorry, Manish, please continue.
just to, Surendraji's point, obviously, I was mentioning the sense that, especially from with the end of the Cold War, 9/11, obviously, and in fact, structurally, systemically, I think India and US, as Vajpayee in fact pointed out, that India and US are naturalized. And I did mention in my, at somewhere in my presentation that, in fact, S. Jaishankar has come out openly that we do have divergences with the Americans on some aspects of the FPAC, of their FPAC policy. And I also agree with and also this point about nationalist Taliban element. I think, and in fact, Mr. Mukhopadhyay, in fact, also dealt with that with that point. I think, as one shifts, as Taliban shifts from a movement towards Kabul to actually sitting in Kabul, I think all sorts of options will open up, because obviously it is now, I mean, no doubt that it is a Pakistan-backed project, but at some time, I think, I also see that Afghans are fiercely independent, and at some stage, they once they are firmly ensconced in Kabul, I think different sort of narratives, different sort of options, different sort of leverages would come into play, which India can exploit over a point of time, and that's exactly why this whole policy of strategic patience makes sense. So I think that's it from my side. Yes, over to you, Rajesh.
Yeah. So we will go for Q&A for next 10 minutes. So first question is from myself. So I would like to ask Gautam Upadhyay ji and Surendra ji and Manish ji. So for last 20 years, the Afghan community was out of Sharia law, and 20 years means you have a one new whole generation. So and again, if Taliban comes and they are always putting the Sharia and Islamic laws in the preview of Islamic laws, we will allow this, allow that. Everybody has watched that press conference by a spokesperson of Taliban. So this new generation, whole new generation in the last 20 years, which was out of Sharia law. So if you impose the Sharia law, what will be the implications on the Afghan community, and what will, how they can resist it, or how they can, whether they can accept it or resist it?
Who would you like to answer first, Rajesh?
You, sir, you.
Okay. So, the Afghan people are Muslims, and actually Islam is already part of the constitution. It's called the Islamic Republic, Government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. And so actually whatever is there in Islam can be practiced. It is not that Islam is in any way suppressed in Afghanistan. What the Taliban are bringing is a particular version of an obscurantist, but also a very repressive, very rigid, very backward version of Islam. And the Afghan people suffered it. And the first opportunity they had to get rid of that, they got rid of that in 2001, albeit with the help of the United States, thanks to 9/11. Once again, the Afghan people are maybe resigned at the moment, but they are not going to suffer this indefinitely. There is bound to be a resistance. That is going to be the real resistance and liberation of Afghanistan once again. Last time it was Ahmad Shah Massoud. In 1996, when they were forced out of Kabul, Ahmad Shah Massoud was just another, people call him warlord, I call him a jihadi leader. He was just another leader, like Hikmatyar. But he became Ahmad Shah Massoud when he led the resistance, when he mobilized the resistance. Other people will come up. So this is my point on, and this generation, by the way, people should not think that Afghans are mostly like Taliban. Actually, Afghans are mostly like this new generation. This new generation, 20 years, they have seen freedom, they have tasted liberties, they have tasted economic opportunities that come with that. And they may not have the means to fight just now, but a resistance is bound to come up. There is no question of it. Unless you believe that Afghanistan can be permanently locked into this kind of state and there is no human spirit and there is no spirit of freedom left in Afghanistan. So, in my view, what India should be doing is to keep the alternative of an Afghan of a democratic Afghanistan alive. When I say democratic Afghanistan, I don't mean US style diplomacy, I don't mean UK style diplomacy, democracy, I don't even mean Indian style democracy. They will have their own forms of democracy, but at least they should feel free and not repressed under repressive Shariat law.
Rajesh ji,
Yeah,
I agree with Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay ji on the characterization of Taliban as an organization or a platform that practices obscurantist, outdated understanding of Islam. And in the process, they have alienated large sections of Afghan society, and the Afghan society is bound to rebel, bound to resist any reimposition of this kind of a rigid and, in fact, anti-Afghan anti-Afghan mode of Islam on Afghanistan, because even before the Soviet invasion, Afghanistan, as Ambassador Mukhopadhyay earlier mentioned, was in many ways a normal country where women exercised and enjoyed many freedoms, and these women are bound to resist and regain the freedoms that they had earlier. And of course, in these 20 years, there have been much more international exposure. But one thing I would like to say, that any kind of modernity or democracy, and again, I agree with the ambassador that this has to be Afghan kind of democracy, nor British democracy, American democracy, or even Indian democracy. Any imposition of democracy, any imposition of modernity from outside is counterproductive. Afghan society should evolve in the light of its own genius. Afghan people there's a very rich history. It's not they are proud Afghan, but they're not fanatic Afghans. And which is why they have immense goodwill for India, knowing that India is a multi-religious country, a Hindu majority country. If they had goodwill, and they still have goodwill for India, it is because they are not fanatics. And this is something we should recognize.
Right.
Manish, do you have anything to say?
I would like to,
if I may just add just half a minute, I'll recount a very interesting experience I had when I went to Afghanistan in 1989. I had an opportunity to go to Mazar-e-Sharif, and my guide was an Afghan. As we were flying in a small plane, he said, look down at that statue. I looked down, it was Bamiyan Buddha. So I asked him, you are a Muslim, why did you take efforts to show this statue of Buddha to me? I'm a Hindu. His answer was, it may be a Buddhist statue, but it is part of Afghan heritage and history. It was there even before Islam came. We are proud of this. So this is Afghanistan, which Taliban tried to destroy, and Afghanistan will regain this heritage.
Manish?
No, I completely would agree with Ambassador Mukhopadhyay. In fact, there is a serious reversal of whatever gains have happened from 2001 to 2021, especially for the Afghan youth. I think it's a very sad state of affairs, and the Afghan dreams in that sense. I mean, whatever you might abuse the Americans for, they really got with their alliance partners. You built hospitals, you built basic healthcare facilities, school, you had different universities, Kabul University, you really got good people to come and teach there. So I think these are some positives which have been really scuttled by Taliban coming back in full force in Kabul. So that's indeed very sad. But I mean, let's I mean, maybe I mean at this stage of life one can be cynical or whatever. But I think the youth would be leading that resistance, as Ambassador pointed out very rightly, in many ways. And let's not forget that there are multiple with this whole media, even in Afghanistan. I think the social media also, there are multiple ways in which that resistance will come out.
Um, CA Adesh Jainji, you have a question? Mr. Adesh Jain. Adesh Jain, you have a question? I think.
He is on mute,
Okay. No, he is unmuted.
but we are not able to hear him.
One moment.
Can I ask a question?
Okay, you can continue.
My question is to Master Gautam. Were the developments in Afghanistan well scripted last year when the peace talks were held in Doha? Does it show Americans have a dual policy on world affairs, as we say in Hindi, Katni and Karni? And what are the challenges for India going forward, since now we have a new bloc which is emerging, that is Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and India on the other side. Now, how do you see India aligning with whom, or we will have to fight this on our own? What are the options for India to safeguard its interest in Afghanistan, since it has invested heavily?
Thank you, Amirji. I think you've asked some very fundamental questions. Can you just quickly refresh me on the first question? I'll come to the second one.
Sir, was the script
scripted, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely scripted. Actually, ever since the Deputy Secretary of State reached out to the Taliban for direct talks, the decision was made essentially that they are going to hand over Afghanistan to Pakistan for Pakistan's project of bringing in the Taliban. Particularly when during the US-Taliban deal, Khalilzad separated the US-Taliban part of the deal from the Afghan talks and ceasefire. Effectively, you had handed over Afghanistan to the Taliban and behind them Pakistan. The fact that they did not develop a national army capable of defending was also part of this. Actually, I wrote about this, that since 2010 officially London conference, the idea of reconciliation and talking to the Taliban was already there at the London conference in the international agenda. But for 10 years, until the Americans started the talks, the Pakistanis did not allow Afghans to speak to the Taliban. Karzai tried it. He tried through his tribal networks, particularly through Baradar, and Baradar got locked up in jail precisely because of that. They tried it through the army. They tried it through the Pakistani state. Ghani went with folded arms, abjectly to the Pakistani army to say, please let us talk to the Taliban. They brought the delegation, and then the news came out that Mullah Omar has been dead for the last 2 years. Nobody has seen Mullah Hebatullah for a long time. You only hear spokespersons. You don't see the leadership. You don't see the faces. Even the faces that you see are being controlled from behind. So this is a conscious, deliberate decision of the Americans to hand over Afghanistan to Pakistan. Why they are doing this is something that we need to think about. I've written about it, so I won't go into that. Secondly, your very fundamental point. See, what has happened is, for the last 20 years, and I understand, Sudhindraji's kind of, anger with the Americans, but the broad alignment that we have seen is a kind of democratic Afghanistan supported by the US, the West, the democratic world, including India. Not as an alliance, but generally an alignment. What has happened with this takeover is that you have a Pakistani proxy in Afghanistan, and you have Pakistan behind it, and now you have China behind it, and both Russia and Iran also playing their own games, mainly against the United States. But the new alignment, and again I say not an alliance, the alliance is Pakistan-China alliance. The new alignment is all these countries in which we are completely knocked out. We have no place. Now, if we think that the Taliban can become our strategic partner, or a better strategic partner than democratic Afghanistan or the young people, then I must say, I think we are deluding ourselves. It's not possible. You must realize that actually supporting the democratic alternative, the democratic idea in Afghanistan, whatever version of democracy is there, is the only ally that we have in Afghanistan. It's our strategic ally. And therefore, I'm not saying we should go, military, or that we should support the resistance right away or anything like that. I'm saying we should keep this idea alive, because otherwise we are lost. Otherwise, we have no space in this entire region. And that point that I was making about severing the connection with India is part of that whole, alignment that is now developing. So we have to find ways and means. You ask how to do it. I would say we still need to keep that space for P2P relations. In other words, whatever minimal disengagement that we can have, so that Afghan students can come to India, so that Afghan media can relocate to India, so that Afghan think tanks, Afghan scholars can find an address and a place of safety where they can be free from the Taliban. Medical treatment, soft kind of diplomacy. And going from there, for example, a voice, even a radio that they can have based somewhere. Maybe another country, I'm saying it doesn't have to be, it can be, but it can also be there. So I think there are many things that we can do up the ladder. But you need that little window to be able to have that relationship. And I would not go so far as to legitimize them or to recognize them as yet. There are many steps we can take before that. But yes, we need to negotiate a space so that Afghanistan is not locked away from us. And that space should come through a people-to-people, if possible, a trade relationship. We should get Afghan businessmen to relocate, so they can find, maybe through third countries, to do business. The possibilities are endless. We are not weak. We have our strategic ally that I call Democratic Afghanistan is stronger than the Taliban. They have been defeated by Pakistan right now. They're not going to be defeated forever.
Thank you, Ambassador. I have a supplementary on this. What's your take on, how Taliban got a very easy passage to Kabul? There was no resistance. Does it show that the government in power was very corrupt, or they were unpopular with the citizens of the country?
Yes, the government had absolutely no connect with the people. This was not a Taliban victory, it was a government defeat. In particular, President Ghani's government was a hopeless government, I have to admit now, because it was run by a small coterie. There were many things that have happened. I told you it was a 20-year project to defeat them psychologically. And there were psychological operations, there were information operations, they were embedded deep down there. They cultivated through information operations this image of invincibility and image of inevitability. When Afghan people saw this, they said, all right, they recognized the reality and they said, all right, you Afghan, me Afghan, let's switch sides, right? But people in Afghanistan know that this is an Afghan face. They are Afghan Muslims of one kind or the other, but they have a Pakistani brain and a Pakistani hand behind that. So yes, there was a total failure of the Afghan state. But people, including the United States and Pakistan, have been working on the failure of the Afghan state since 2001. It's not just Ghani's fault. It's systematic.
Thank you, Ambassador. Over to Rajesh.
I would like to ask a question to Sudhendraji. Sudhendraji, what kind of role you see China will be playing in new Afghanistan, and will US allow it to play?
China is a neighbor of Afghanistan, actually a geographical neighbor of Afghanistan, even though they share a rather small border. And being a neighbor, they have the same concern that we in India have. That is, there should be no export of terrorism and Islamist extremism into China, where Xinjiang province has a Muslim majority. So our interests here are in some degree of congruity. Now, we cannot, as Atal Bihari Vajpayee used to say, we cannot choose our neighbors. We can choose our friends, but China is a neighbor, Pakistan is a neighbor. So we therefore have to change our mindset and have a new strategy in view of the new developments in Afghanistan for being part of a regional solution to Afghanistan. And here, I think it was Manish Dabhade who made a reference to SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It is one platform where both India and Pakistan are members. And the SCO Afghanistan contact group has done some very good work. And it has very explicitly stated that Afghanistan must not become a country with sanctuaries for terrorist organizations. Who is saying this? SCO, in which there is China, there is Russia, there is India, there is Pakistan, there are others also. So we must activate every single platform to ensure that Afghanistan remains stable, Afghanistan moves in the direction of inclusive government, and most importantly, no sanctuary for terrorist groups. And therefore, just as I advocate India and Pakistan working together and not at cross purposes in Afghanistan, I think that India and China also should work together and not at cross purposes in Afghanistan, which is to the benefit of everyone concerned. And there is ample scope for India and China to work together. So this again requires a change in our mindset that China is our enemy, Pakistan is our enemy. No, this will in fact isolate India. I would like to make one last point because we may be coming close to the end of the discussion. Whatever is happening in Afghanistan should not be used for communal polarization in India for domestic electoral purposes, which is actually happening. And this is not in the interest of India's democracy, and it's not in the interest of Afghanistan and Afghan democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhendra ji, for making that very, very important point. Very important point. I also agree with you that, we should look for bilateral and regional cooperation in general and with all the countries of our region. For that, I also agree with you that we need to change our mindset. But what recipe do you have? Do you think Pakistan also needs to change its mindset?
Of
and
course.
What recipe do you have to change that mindset?
Pakistan will be forced by circumstances to change its mindset. And if I very closely watch what is happening in the debate in Pakistan after the developments in Afghanistan. And there is a realization that in the pursuit of so-called strategic depth in Afghanistan, there has been a strategic depth given to Islamic radicalization and extremism within Pakistan. And Pakistani society has suffered a lot by this misadventure. So within the people of Pakistan and many intellectuals and political establishment, including military establishment, they had to fight a bitter war against TTP in which 60 to 70,000 soldiers of Pakistan army have been killed. So there is a certain rethinking, and we should have this dialogue. We may not agree 100%, but why have we closed all doors for dialogue with Pakistan? Now, let me just make one very important point that I compliment the Modi government for ceasefire on LOC in February this year. Along with ceasefire, the two governments have said something very significant, that the two governments will address the core concerns of each other, which have the potential to disturb peace. I think that we should take this very seriously, open dialogue with Pakistan at various levels. First of all, let us reactivate SAARC. Let's re-establish full diplomatic teams in both countries, have high commissioners, people-to-people contact. I am sure that we can make common cause in Afghanistan.
I have one last short question. Is it the right time or right occasion to ban these madrasas in India and bring the Muslims in the mainstream education system so that de-radicalization should happen for future generations? Sudhindra ji and Gautam ji.
Rajesh ji, I very, very strongly advocate against any such effort. To think that madrasas are the breeding grounds of terrorism in India is wholly misplaced. It's a traditional Islamic way of teaching, which has been captured by some extremists for their own uses, but that's a fringe element. Now, if we think of banning all madrasas for the purpose of stopping terrorism, this will be counterproductive. We must never, never do it. In fact, we should use madrasas, and there are many madrasas that teach a moderate version of Islam in India, in Pakistan, and in many parts of the world. So this thinking is something that I strongly advocate against.
Ambassador Gautam ji, this Taliban is a product of madrasas. So what is your view?
So, one way, look, this is outside my territory. I don't normally comment on domestic politics. This is not my area of expertise. But as a citizen, I completely share Sudhindraji's views. In fact, let me link it with the question that you said and also with Afghanistan. There are many people, Pakistan has been promoting this kind of distorted Wahhabi, so-called Deobandi Islam. And Maulvis and mullahs in Afghanistan are aware that they are being fed a distorted extremist version of Deobandi Islam by the Pakistanis in those madrasas there. That is what they are using to brainwash them. They used to repeatedly come to us to say, please allow our religious scholars to come to Deoband in India. Because they see the Deoband in India as the more true version of Islam. And Deoband in India has never preached violence. In fact, they have issued fatwas against violence. So we should be very careful about demonizing a part of our community, a part of India, a big part of India, 14%, 15%, whatever you may think it is, and of associating anything associated with them as also part of that project. I completely share Sudhindraji's views on this. There are many areas in which I share his views.
No, I would like to add just one point, that there is a very recent statement by a Taliban leader, Mullah Khairullah Wali Khair Khawa, a senior Taliban leader, who said that we do not want Wahhabism in Afghanistan. It is a Taliban leader who is saying this.
If there is one way we can de-radicalize, is actually to get more and more of them to Indian Islamic seminaries.
Great. One last question is waiting since last half an hour. Adish Jain.
I am Adish Jain from Acharya Gyan Sagar Interfaith Foundation, and we are involved in mission Violence is Harmful to the Society. This war at Afghanistan has witnessed brutal killings and humanitarian situations and multiplying human rights abuses. But this also witnessed a battle of ideas and beliefs to the world. Like we have different ideologies in India also. Just now we were talking about madrasas. So why can't we have more restrictions on spreading these ideologies on the streets and for land grabbing? Why can't we restrict, do something for doing this? Otherwise, we can see such things in India to happen in future, and that can be a cause for, and that can weaken our civilized and violence peaceful society in India. That can be a cause for violence, with India and the United Nations and the whole world is concerned. So why can't we have restrictions on such things?
Sudhindraji?
Very short answer. We should not view madrasas. What is a madrasa? Madrasa stands for a school. It provides both religious education and increasingly also secular education, that is development-oriented education. It is wrong to think that madrasas are a problem or they can be a problem for India in future. No. Again, let us first go to madrasas, the big seminaries, Islamic seminaries, and exactly see what is taught there. And that will disabuse us of many wrong conceptions that we have about Islam and the Islamic system of education.
Now we move to the conclusion point. I would request Tanmay Chakravarti to do conclusion out of thanks.
No, it's been an extremely educative and fascinating session, and I really respect the value of time that has been provided by our eminent speakers who have gone for 1.5 hours and more instead of the scheduled 1 hour of this webinar on such an important topic. The fact that there was so much for us to learn about what is currently going on in Pakistan, Afghanistan dynamics, and what we in India, if I can just describe ourselves, we are caught in between a rock and a hard place as far as the current situation in Afghanistan is concerned. And if I can take away from what the speakers had to tell us, I think we are going to see the advent of Afghanistan 4.0. If I can categorize the earlier 3 versions, the one version was the pre-Russian era where, Sudhindraji talked about a very modern view and outlook of people in Afghanistan where there was modernity. And then it turned into a foreign occupied country by Russia initially, and then by the US. So 1.0 is good old Afghanistan, 2.0 is the Russian occupied Afghanistan, 3.0 is the US occupied Afghanistan. And as we stand today, we are probably seeing the emergence of Afghanistan 4.0, which is something that will be very interesting for us to keenly watch, because there is a historical tie between the Afghan people and the Indian people, which is going back to thousands of years. And therefore, we have definitely a moral and an obligation to see that the true Afghan people are the ones who govern their country. Yes, there is the understanding as well that there are lots of sects and lots of sub-regions, and it is probably going to be a very, very unique and a typical form of democracy that is going to emerge in Afghanistan, which is going to be true to themselves. And it doesn't have to stereotype itself to democracy of any other form or any other country. This is for us to see, and time will tell us, I'm sure, the way it emerges. With the kind of investments that initially Russia made and then later US made, $1 trillion of taxpayers' money of the US spent on Afghanistan, and then all of it leading to nothing, where it's literally starting from scratch all over again, creating the new form of government. It will be very interesting, but I really deeply appreciate the contributions of all the speakers, Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, Sudhindra ji, and Dr. Manish, for all their views. And I'm sure all of us who were attending this webinar, and there were a fair amount in the Zoom as well as in the Facebook, which is also publishing this webinar. It was a very fascinating and educative session. And on behalf of the Vivekananda Youth Connect Foundation, we deeply appreciate your sparing your valuable time to educate all of us on the dynamics. And the one takeaway that I personally take away is that it is the human being that complicates life in the earth. That's so clearly coming out with so many connotations, so many dynamics, so many groups that get evolved with human beings. And which brings us back to the song that we heard in the beginning, where it's the blood of the human being, and there is no demarcation amongst all of us. At the end of it, I think that realization is what the world has to come to post-pandemic, post this war, to the benefit of the current leadership in Taliban, occupied Afghanistan. At least we are not seeing major scenes of violence, or it has not been a very hostile takeover with the least amount of lives lost. So that itself, I think, is a beginning of a positive. And we in India can only hope that there is a smooth, if not a smooth, but a gradual transition towards the final emergence of the Afghanistan that the people of Afghanistan want for themselves, for their own country. And let us all resolve and positively hope and be optimistic that they will be able to reach that destination truly because they really deserve this after so many decades of disturbance and somebody else trying to impose their template on Afghanistan as a country. So once again, thank you everybody for participating. Our sincere thanks to our eminent speakers for having contributed and where we learned so much about the current crisis. Thank you once again and wish everybody a happy Raksha Bandhan on today's occasion. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, Tanmay. Let us close this session. Thank you, everyone.